Hi, everybody. Many apologies. We had a little bit of a technical snafu. So I'm going to start back onto the first slide because I believe some folks missed hearing me. So just to recap, a lot of what Rachel said in our intro, colleges can play a really important role in SNAP E&T. They are tapped into labor market demands. They have access to the business community and understand what industries are creating openings for people to get jobs. They are using the career pathways model often, which allows individuals to build on their skills and advance in their field that they've chosen. Many colleges, one who we have today will share a little bit about Skagit Valley College, do a really great job of bridging pre-college work to college level work. So they're offering those opportunities for students on campus to build up their basic skills so they can access programs that are at the college level. And then colleges are also using models that integrate skill building in a work setting, so either apprenticeship models or other types of integrated learning models. So how does SNAP E&T fit in? SNAP E&T helps colleges create capacity for SNAP students to access programs. So through the reimbursement model, colleges are able to grow their capacity for more students to come in, often SNAP recipients. We know that many individuals who are receiving SNAP often need extra support to succeed in college, and this allows colleges to have that capacity to do that. So it creates capacity for colleges to provide supportive services, additional advising and employment advising, so students can really work towards getting into the career that's going to be right for them. It also allows for eligible students to access SNAP. So this is what we talk about when we talk about the student eligibility rule. So in general, students who are enrolled at least half time at an institution of higher education are not eligible for SNAP. There are some important exemptions, and there are in fact many, many exemptions that are listed in the CFR that's referenced here. We've highlighted a couple important ones. I would think in this conversation the most important one is really that if you are placed in an education activity through SNAP E&T or other employment and training programs that are meant for low-income individuals, then you are still able to receive SNAP while enrolled in school. So this is a really important exemption for the student eligibility rule that if a college is offering SNAP E&T activities, then their students can still receive SNAP. And we know that's important because we know that students are actually facing food insecurity while on campuses. And so not only does it allow them to really access that benefit, but it also makes them eligible for SNAP E&T. And I'm going to turn it over to Rick Krause now, who's going to talk about funding and get into some other aspects of the role that colleges play.
Thank you, Susan. Pell Grants is a great resource for those programs that are credit-bearing and are long enough to be eligible. And there's a way that funding source works to support SNAP E&T. Next slide. And there's some, thank you. And some of the costs that can be covered include tuition and fees, books, supplies, transportation, and other living expenses. So this really makes a difference in supporting access for SNAP E&T students. being eligible for this resource. Next slide. So there's some do's and don'ts that relate to the use of Pell Grants. SNAP E&T can't replace Pell, that's called supplanting, but it can be combined with Pell to provide additional support services. And it can also be a bridge to Pell. So many college systems use that to get people to use SNAP E&T to start somebody for a quarter or a semester, and then encourage them to apply for Pell, and they can transition to Pell. And after they receive the Pell Grant, which covers their tuition, books, and fees and other costs, they still can get the support they need from SNAP E&T in terms of support services and student advising to help them be successful. So this is a list of all the different non-federal fund sources, and when you work with college systems, it's kind of important to kind of map out what sources colleges have. The primary source tends to come from the state or county or even city funds. There are private donations like foundations that support. Important to note that once they get reimbursed for providing services to SNAP E&T students, that becomes income for that college, and it can be reinvested to support their program, and so you can draw down more reimbursement the college could. Some states have significant funding to support low-income students, like state worker retraining dollars, low-income student support. Some set aside tuition in terms of scholarships, and there may be some specific funds tied to populations like offender reentry and homeless and non-custodial parents. There is one federal fund source that could be leveraged because it's no longer considered federal funding once it gets out to the community, and that's the Community Development Block Grant. In-kind is an option, and also social enterprise is an option as well. So the reality is, when you work with a college partner who doesn't have robust funding sources to support low-income students, you kind of focus on some baseline funding, and that is the state general funds paying for the positions providing direct student support. So that could be the student advisor who does that more intensive kind of student advising that we know works really well with this population in terms of getting people into programs that make sense, persisting and completing. But any enhanced work that supports the SNAP E&T program, so it could be parts of other positions. So the workforce ed director, it could be someone in the business office who's supporting the program. Those are all covered or could be covered based on time and effort. And then you have indirect costs, which are tied directly to supporting those positions. And every college has a federally approved indirect rate, but it has to be funded in terms of getting reimbursed by non-federal sources. So this is defined in a letter that every college has in terms of the negotiated rate, and it also talks about what costs are covered. In many colleges, it's salaries and benefits. The costs do need to be covered by non-federal funds in order to be reimbursed, and they must be accompanied by an expenditure to support SNAP E&T students. So that could be the staff support I was talking about, the salaries and benefits related to that. So the other thing that really helps when you sit down with college partners is to map out the structure of the community college system in your state. And in terms of SNAP E&T partnerships, there's basically 3 ways you can go. There could be a state governing board that provides oversight, a state board that provides oversight to the colleges and is used to administering funding, like SNAP E&T. Some states use a consortium model. That really has come up a lot in the TAC grants, where there's a lead college, and that can work well with SNAP E&T. Or it could all be decentralized, where you have individual contracts, the SNAP agency, with each college. That gets kind of burdensome when you have multiple colleges. Washington has 34. So it makes sense to look at some of these other models. You also want to look at the leadership structure. What kind of leadership buy-in do you need? Is it at the local college level in terms of senior leadership at the colleges, or if it's a statewide system? And can they help with the oversight of the operation? So in Washington and some other states, there's some umbrella contracts with the state boards. In Oregon, there's one with a league college that does some of that oversight. And then what kind of programs are offered that are in alignment with SNAP E&T in terms of skill building and getting people the kind of jobs that are going to make them self-sufficient. And then how do funds get to the colleges and who controls the funds and how they are utilized. So those are all key things to consider when you're sitting down with a college partnership. And I think with that, that's my last slide, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Schramm, and he's the program manager for Kirkwood colleges, and they've done a great job with their SNAP E&T partnership, and he can explain how it's been working.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Susan and Rick, for inviting me to share about Iowa's program and talk a little bit about the way that we have our program structured in our state. And Rick did a great job of setting up kind of the general background of how it looks. And I'll try to provide a little bit more about the specifics of how our program works and maybe a little bit more just background into how we got set up and how we're operating now. So please feel free to go to the next slide. So prior to 2015, the E&T program in Iowa was offered through Iowa Workforce Development, and it was really keying in on a few specific geographic areas and primarily utilized 100% funds, which were as a result of relatively minimal non-federal investment in the state and other non-federal sources. And so in 2015, our Department of Human Services contracted with Kirkwood because Kirkwood had the ability to offer immediate integration with other community colleges through available training programs funded by non-federal reimbursable source funds. The program, since Kirkwood began working in it, has really focused on 50-50 reimbursement. The colleges, spend those dollars up front and request the 50% back. Kirkwood also gets 100% reimbursement for administrative services. Next slide, please. Here's just a quick overview of the state investments that Iowa has in non-credit programs. There's the Gap Tuition Assistance Program, which is short-term training in an industry-designated in-demand field. So those are defined by curriculum, largely defined by industry. It's based on financial need. The state has about a $2 million investment, and it can support tuition, direct training costs, required books and equipment for those educational programs. The second program is a little bit more flexible. It's Pathways for Academic Career and Employment, short-term training and advanced degree up to 2 years, credit side too for middle skill careers. It's a little bit more flexible on who may qualify. Those with financial need, obviously, and then low-skilled, unemployed, underemployed, or dislocated workers. A little bit larger investment here because of that flexibility and can provide more than just the specific educational needs Gap can. It can also help support dependent care, transportation, housing, car repairs, things like that. And predominantly the PACE funding pays for our navigators and their work with our participants. Next slide, please. So in initially setting up the program in its current state, it began with the sharing of information. Community colleges shared information with DHS on GAP and PACE, how those are funded, how those operate in the colleges, and how those may align with E&T. Conversely, DHS shared with community college the opportunity for reimbursement and what procedures need to be in place in order for that to take place. So there was kind of a sharing of here's the opportunity for both sides. How can we work together to serve the people of Iowa through E&T? So DHS and Kirkwood then forged an agreement for service provision. So our state agency does eligibility work and program oversight, policy oversight, and really is in charge of the program in Iowa. Kirkwood has been able to work in the service provision through contracting with other community colleges and serving participants at our college as well. And we started out with Kirkwood and 2 other colleges. Kirkwood has about 20,000 credit students. Des Moines area community college has about 37,000, and Southwestern Community College has about 1,700 credit students. So just relative sizes being very different, we wanted to see kind of the array of what's offered in the state and how it's offered to people in urban, rural settings, and how we may be able to extrapolate that as examples with other community colleges in the future. Next slide, please. So the initial structure of the program set up Kirkwood as the program administrator. And in my position as the Kirkwood program manager, I serve as the liaison between our state agency and our partner colleges as a conduit through which communications, administrative procedures, and functions flow. That includes the participant eligibility that's checked monthly, monthly billing and reimbursement work, communications on policy and procedure, and quarterly and annual reporting. All of those things run through our office here. Any billing runs through, any reimbursement, financials run through our financial department to other colleges' financial departments. And it's a lot smoother way for DHS to be able to do their work as well, not getting questions and administrative pieces from multiple different sources, getting those together in one source. Also, Kirkwood provides technical assistance and monitoring support to the other subcontracted colleges. We do a lot of pop-up questions. Every policy is written as well as it can be, but there are things that pop up that we haven't seen before. So we do a lot of working with our colleges to make sure that they understand how to proceed with new things that come up, and our state agency is helpful with the oversight of a lot of that policy and how to suss out what we're looking at a lot of times too. Next slide, please. So we work to put in relatively solid procedures to back up the way that structure works. So we have set forms and procedures for participant eligibility and referrals. We have assessment tools that we use for participants that we try and mirror relatively similarly how colleges were already doing a lot of their assessment piece. Our employment plan is kind of the backbone structure of how participants move through their education and through their job search, and our navigators work very closely with them. We have billing workbooks that are uniform per college and quarterly reporting that's uniform. All the procedures are intended for consistency across member colleges, but we want to offer enough flexibility to allow those colleges to do what they were doing well before we came in, and to continue working under their own policies and procedures. Also, since the program in its current inception is still relatively new, the processes have been continuously adjusted based on partner college navigator, Kirkwood program manager, myself, and DHS program manager feedback. So we try and keep them consistent and as solid as we can, but we understand that if there are updates needed, we try and get those to the colleges the best we can to help serve them as well. Next slide, please. So in the first year of the program in Iowa, we did start out relatively slow with our first 3 colleges, with only 74 participants on the year and $102,000 in reimbursements back to the colleges. And I think it worked really well to start out slowly like this so that we could start to solidify those procedures, understand the questions that we didn't know to ask, and things like that. Next slide, please. Since the first year, in 2015, we've expanded beyond our 3 initial colleges. Iowa has 15 community colleges that cover the entire state geographically. And we are intent on adding all of those colleges to make sure that we can serve anyone in the state wherever they are. And hoping to do that over the next 3 to 4 to 5 years, just to make sure that we ensure we have the capacity to serve any colleges that come on without kind of overstepping our bounds in a way. So our expansion procedures have been offering kind of information sessions on invite to all the community colleges. We give a full overview of the opportunities and the administrative requirements of the program at the information session. At the end of which we offer colleges a self-assessment and application, and give them about a month to kind of self-assess, understand where they are, what their needs are, how they may be able to fit into our program, and how E&T may be able to help them and their participants reach higher successes. We then take about a month for application review and do on-site visits with those schools to learn as much as we can about them, and really try to figure out what procedures they have in place and how E&T program may be able to fit with their procedures, how close of a fit we are, and what type of opportunity we may be able to help them provide their participants. Lastly, we take about 2 months for accepting those colleges and getting them trained and ready to go, with the hope that on day 1 of the contract that they have, they can begin enrolling E&T participants. Next slide, please. So after the first year of starting out relatively slowly, the first 3 quarters of the following year, after we had solidified things and started to move forward, we really hit the ground running with a lot more participants, a lot more reimbursements. And this is the first 3 quarters of fiscal year 16. In the 4th quarter, we added 3 additional colleges. We limited their scope in their first quarter of participation in E&T to a fixed number of participants so that we could continue learning about how their college procedures look, and they could look at how their interactions with our procedures work, so we could really iron out any bumps that we have on a smaller scale before we ramp up. This year, we have a potential to add 2 more colleges in our current expansion process, and we have the hope that they may be able to begin enrolling participants as of July 1st, similar to how fiscal year 16 worked. And those colleges, after the 3 that we expanded in 2016, after their initial quarter of kind of ironing out bumps and things like that, have really expanded their programs a lot and expanded their interactions with us a lot since kind of that first trial quarter. Next slide, please. So really the lessons that we've learned in our time in E&T are ensuring that the policies and procedures are well-defined and understood, but allowed to kind of run their course when there are suggestions. So if there's a piece in the process that seems to be kind of a bump in the road, is it kind of just an immediate annoyance, or is it something that really needs to be changed over time? Because you know, we don't want to change constantly and have new training all the time. We want to make sure that if there's a change, it's a necessary one, and we can ensure that everyone's trained and ready to go on that for the foreseeable future. Secondly, as I've kind of alluded to earlier, starting slowly and ramping up, making sure that all the administrators at colleges, navigators, and any other partners are on the same page, and really have a good understanding of what the other colleges are doing, how they're doing it, what type of populations they serve, what their workforce looks like, and what their employers look like. And also making sure that those colleges understand what they're in for when they're looking at potentially becoming an E&T partner. Working through all of the bugs in the process through experience. We've gone through a lot of different iterations of all of our procedures, and right now they're perfect until we find something new, but right now you know, we've ironed out a lot of those bumps. Looking at how early investments really pay dividends in the long run. So looking at how if we can you know, spend a little bit more time, maybe colleges may be hesitant to join, seeing the amount of kind of administrative work that needs to be done. Doing that early work, doing that kind of thorough training that may not be reimbursable prior to the contract will pay off with a lot smoother processes and quicker reimbursements in the long run. And then lastly, looking at the non-federal sources that Iowa provides community colleges for short-term non-credit training, starting with the low-hanging fruit, starting with those sure things, and then thinking about diversifying second. You know, we're right now looking at potential state cuts, so we're really looking at how we may be able to diversify and be able to provide the same level of services or greater services to more participants in the future. So I think that's my time there, guys. So think about any questions, and I'll be happy to answer any questions on any of that.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Now I'd like to introduce Allison Fernandez. Allison is the Director of Student Success at Skagit Valley College in Mount Vernon, Washington. They're a community that is just north of Seattle. Thank you, Allison.
Great, thank you. I also want to say I have Maria Galindo here with me today, and she is our direct frontline staff member, navigator for the BFED and multiple other programs at Skagit Valley College. So when it comes to questions about how our program operates daily, Maria is our #1 resource and expert for that information. So she's here to answer questions if they come up today as well. So Skagit Valley College has had the BFET grant since it actually began, and we're a well-established program now that is reimbursed between $350,000 and $375,000 annually. Oh, okay. I'm going to go to the next slide. So our program at SVC is set out to serve anyone that is receiving federal food benefits who's not receiving temporary assistance for needy families. So the general eligibility criteria that is either pursuing a professional technical degree or they're pursuing basic education. And as you'll see as I go through my slides, that we target students to do both, and we often target them to do it at the same time. So we're not one to say come in and do basic education and leave it at that. And we really work for students to co-enroll in both programs at the same time if they're working towards a high school diploma or GED, so that they actually leave with, at the very least, a certificate that's going to lead to employment. And the employment piece is one of the most important to us because that's what the program is driven to do. And the way that we kind of suss out if that is what a student's actual intention is one, seeing that they are interested in pursuing basic education in tandem with a professional technical degree or certificate, and that they have a specific education goal in mind, or that we can work with them through programming to identify goals that would lead to employment. Next slide. So one of the pieces that we are in charge of at SVC is making sure that our community is aware of the BFET program. And so we make sure that we have a recruitment and engagement plan annually that's going to reach out to the populations that this grant is capable of serving. So we have multiple ways that we do that. We have, over the last 4 years, been able to keep our mouths pretty quiet because as the economy was not doing so well, BFET was a wonderful way for somebody to come in and do retraining or training to actually reach their employment goals, because we really saw a shift that it wasn't good enough to go out with a high school diploma or a GED and find employment. And so folks were in a position where they were accessing SNAP and that we were able to serve them. And we kind of sat there and watched students come to us in the hundreds because we don't have the capacity to serve more than 200 to 300 students annually. But over the last 2 years, we've seen our caseload, and we consider it a caseload because we use a case management model to work with these individuals as they come through our program, dwindle off a bit. And so we went back out to our partners and had to become educators on what the BFET program was, and that it was an appropriate referral if somebody was on SNAP to have them come over to the college because we could be offering them educational services to lead to employment. And so we went back out to our Department of Social and Health Services, and that's the entity in Washington State that actually governs our BFET grant and brings it to us. But what we found on the local level is that the individuals working in the community service organizations, they weren't really aware of what the BFET program was. So we're continually going out to those folks and re-educating on what this program is, and that the clients that they're seeing come through the door would be appropriate to enter into this program as a way to find employment. We also work with our local community agencies through the staff there, and primarily by attending community outreach events. We have a good community coalition where we talk about different resources in our county, and we actually serve 3 county areas out of Skagit Valley College, but we have a good resource coalition there to get information out. And so those are our primary ways of actually engaging and recruiting folks within our local community. Once we have someone that's interested in BFET, we have them complete an application that asks specific questions that identifies strengths and also barriers to becoming employed, and then that looks at different eligibility criteria to make sure that we're funneling them into the correct programming. We are housed in the Student Success Center at Skagit Valley College, which is a lot like a student development center, and it has all of our workforce grants that we offer at Skagit Valley College housed under that umbrella as well. So we have one universal application that applies for 6 separate grants within that area, and then students don't need to necessarily come in, nor do community members, when they're working with people, have to know the exact criteria for someone to apply and become eligible for specific grants. They can throw their hat out there and say which bucket will it fall into, and that's what our staff does, is actually find the appropriate match. And in most cases, BFET, if they're receiving SNAP, is that appropriate match. We can see up to about 90 applicants per quarter. We are in a quarter system, so we have 4 quarters, and we can see about 90 applicants at a time. And so we do that through group intake sessions after students have completed, or potential students have completed an application. They go through a group intake process where they learn more about the programs and they complete an individual education plan as a group in that setting. Once that is done, Maria or one of our coordinators will meet with each individual for up to an hour to actually work out their plan and how education is going to meet their goals at Skagit Valley College and complete any required documentation for the BFET program. We are also required to engage with those students on a monthly basis once they are in the program. So for us, and having Maria and one coordinator, it's been all about streamlining that process. And so we make sure to meet our monthly Tiki marks to make sure we know how those students are doing by, one, having them turn in a quarterly class schedule. We check those schedules and reference it against what their education plan looks like, because Maria is an advisor as well, and so she's doing education plans on each student as they come in and changing those when necessary to go, oh, something happened in that student's life, and tweaking it to meet that need. And so checking those quarterly class schedules against what the student said they would be doing. And so that's once every 3 months, and then during the other 2 months, we have a system where we electronically send out attendance and progress reports to faculty and not to the students, because what we don't want is students going in and having to identify in front of all of their counterparts in the college, hi, I'm a BFET student, and others go, what does that mean? And so we actually electronically check progress and attendance on students directly to the faculty. We don't identify that they're a BFET student to the faculty, as that's not something we're allowed to do, but we're able to see how they're doing. And then we're able to connect with the student if we want to say, hey, you're doing really well, or if we want to say, here's an area that we could assist you in working on. And then we're required to report that into our state database by the 10th of each month, and we go ahead and do that. So we've tried to streamline and kind of batch load as much process as possible while staying true to a case management and navigation model. Next slide. So the services that we provide to students and that we bill off for students are tuition, books, transportation, and emergency support. So I'm going to talk a little bit at the end about our funding model and how we are able to serve students based on our funding model and what we're capable of being reimbursed for. But I'll say up front that in Washington State, we have a very healthy program called State Need Grant that comes in and pays tuition for many students. And at Skagit, we've set it up with our business office to have State Need Grant pay tuition first on every student that is receiving State Need Grant at Skagit Valley College. Therefore, if a BFET student is receiving State Need Grant, we're able to bill. If they receive $1,000 of tuition, we're able to bill for $500 of that and get it back as reimbursement. Those are our healthiest pots of money for, excuse me, our BFET students. So eyes wide open here, tuition is the #1 thing that we're able to bill off of because of that healthy state resource for billing. Next, we have smaller pots of state funds that go towards books, that go towards transportation and emergency assistance, and they're really what Rick spoke to. Some of them are state allocations and some of them are foundation allocations where we're able to track that those were used, can I have water? That those were used to support those students. And tuition is the easiest thing to track because there's a student management system that tells us these dollars paid these students. And we have to collect receipts for books, for transportation, for emergency assistance that shows that these state dollars were funding these specific needs for the program. And so that becomes a large administrative piece, but it's also there's smaller pots of money. So the #1 thing that we are being reimbursed off of is tuition. And then of course staffing dollars. So our base state allocation is actually paying the majority of our staffing dollars, and we're being reimbursed 50% off of that because our college has a commitment to serving this population of students. And it's good for them to be serving this population of students because we'll talk about our model a little bit for educational pathways, but we're quite successful in working this case management model with the students. So we do all of that's what the students want to know. What do you pay for? So We also use our reimbursement dollars to pay for students that don't qualify for any other form of funding that are BFET, and we take those reimbursement dollars and we pay tuition, we pay books, and we pay transportation and emergency assistance, and that's the majority of where our reimbursement dollars go, is to support those students that are BFET only students. We also, of course, assign them a specific college navigator who stays as their advisor through the majority of their program. We create an education plan that gets them to graduation on every single student, and if appropriate, they're enrolled in a college prep course that gets them ready prior to actually starting their first quarter. And then we offer quarterly workshops, and we require that students that are in their first year attend at least 2 per quarter, and we're very specific in looking at workshops that are going to be applicable to their lives at that moment. So probably a month and a half ago, we offered a tax preparation workshop to get them ready. That used to be very important for us to do it in that time period because we were getting them ready. Do your taxes so that you can apply for your financial aid. Now our financial aid date is on October, and it's not quite as important, but it's still important that they do their taxes. And a lot of the time, they don't know how to do that. And so we have a local agency that does tax preparation for low-income individuals for free, and they come in and do a tax preparation workshop. And that's an example of something that's meeting them timely in their lives of what they need to be doing. And then, of course, as they're getting towards completion of their programs, we have partnered with our local one-stop here in Washington. It's called WorkSource, and they come in and they do the workshops that they typically do on-site at the one-stop. They'll do them at Skagit Valley College specifically for the grant students and BFET students. And then a big one is that when a student in Washington, and I don't know how it works in the other states, as a BFET student, they're eligible for subsidized child care if they're in a vocational education or a basic education program through BFET. And so we do quite a few child care referrals for students that are attending Skagit Valley College. We also, if a student is receiving basic food and doesn't meet qualifications under other eligibility guidelines to be receiving basic food and is attending college, they're required to be in the BFET program. So we get quite a few students running through our doors saying, I need to get on this program, I've never heard of it before, but how do I do it? And then they learn about all the other awesome services that BFET can offer. The next slide, please. So we have specific educational pathways at Skagit Valley College that really started with our workforce students, like BFET students, and our TANF students that were attending there. And those were pre-college preparatory programs that were for students that need GEDs, as well as those students that needed remediation to be successful in college. And so we have 2 basic education pathways. One is on-ramp and one is CWPA, as you'll see on the slide, which is the college and workforce prep academy. And I'm actually just going to go straight to the other slide because it gives us. So on-ramp and CWPA, as I'll say it because the other way is a mouthful, are specifically targeted at groups of students based on, one is CASAS reading scores, which is kind of the career readiness reading and math scores, to put them into specific adult basic education pathways, but we also look at other sometimes non-cognitive factors of why they would be placed well into these adult basic education programs to be successful prior to entering their college programs. And so on-ramp is often targeted at students that are on the lower level of reading compared to CWPA, that don't have a GED, and that are English language learners. And the English language learner piece is large for us. What we did at Skagit Valley College is we were noticing that our English language learner population was not moving beyond those English language learning classes, and so we kind of snuck it up on them by changing their final level, what we called level 6 ELL class, into on-ramp class, where we're actually blending probably a 50 to 30% group of ELL folks with our basic education students. And so we're getting a good mix of native English speakers with non-native English speakers in the same classroom that really gets that growth mindset happening of how to reach their college level goals. And so that's a mixture, and we're putting folks through the BFET program into there as well. These are institutionalized programs at this point at our college because they've been so successful. And then the College and Workforce Prep Academy is the higher level, and that is a class that is adult basic education, and you can be working on a GED or not, but it also embeds college level courses that are required for the majority of our professional technical classes as well. And the students that wouldn't be eligible for financial aid, that's where we actually pick up the cost through the BFET program for them to obtain college level credits at the same time that they're working on their adult basic education. And that class tends to have about 50% of students that are seeking a GED or high school diploma and 50% of students that are working on their college readiness to actually launch into their college courses. And then in Washington, of course, we have the IBEST program that couples basic education with professional technical degrees and certificates. And we often look at this, like on that last slide, as a stair step to go from one of these to the other until they're fully launched into the professional technical program where they can get their degree. And I'm very happy to say that most of our programs are now hovering from an 80 to 91% retention and completion rate for our grant students, which is why I say the institution itself as a college should be very interested in these programs and supporting these programs, because a population that can typically bring down your student achievement points within your college is really at our college and multiple colleges across Washington bringing up student achievement because of these very supportive wraparound models that can be created through programs like BFET and the flexibility of those reimbursement dollars when they come in and how you can choose to use them. Next slide. And one of the more unique ways that Skagit Valley College uses our reimbursement funds is through a project called the Experience Work Project. So Skagit Valley College, while located north of Seattle, is in a very rural district, and we have limited employers and nonprofit employers to tap when it comes to internships and job experience. So all entities that are utilizing internships and job shadow experiences locally are tending to the same employers over and over and over again. And so we wanted to look at how can we actually look at employers that are from private industry that we know are hiring that just won't let us in the door. And so one way that we've done that is by coupling with our local Chamber of Commerce and our Workforce Development Council by paying for a contract through our BFET reimbursement dollars and other grant funding dollars to have the chamber use the relationships that they have developed with local employers to say, we've got students from our local community college that, one, either need to explore their career to see if this is the area that they want to work in through a job shadow, or that they're closer to graduation and they're ready for an internship and they're trained, and you can have them for free right now and kind of do that long interview process through an internship. And we're finding that our students through that process are getting their foot into the door with more private industry folks that we didn't have access to, as being one of those many agencies that was tapping those same 5% of employers in our local area. And so we've seen good hire rates, and at the same time students going, ooh, I didn't know that nursing assistants did that, and I'm not going to do that. So thank you for the job shadow. I think I'm going to go in a different direction now. So it's been fruitful for both exploration, for finding the right fit for students, and also for finding places where they can get their foot in the door to be hired, or to simply build a resume to get their foot in the door to the next place that they'll be hired. Next slide, please. So our college is still utilizing using a base funding from their state allocation to fund the BFET program. And so we have an actual account set up specifically for BFET where our college has decided to invest and be reimbursed at the 50% rate from that. And so what I've done here on this slide is show a little bit of how we're actually tracking this. So what we've done is identified the state pots that can pay for BFET students. And so they're here: Opportunity Grant, State Need Grant, Worker Retraining, and SVC Grant, or SV Grant, which is actually our foundation where they come in and pay. And so when students, we track, and when students are awarded out of these, we note it in a spreadsheet, and we have different areas that we can pull to make sure that these are the funding sources that actually paid, for example, on this one, tuition, that's what I'm showing here, for the specific student. And so then when that happens, we bill on a quarterly basis. We're able to roll up those totals. We can say where those dollars were coming from and actually bill on the individual students for 50% of that back. One piece of what we do with that is pay back the institution. If the institution paid for Maria's salary up front, $100, and they're getting $50 of that back, we will often come in and take our reimbursed funds and pay the institution back so that they continue to have this wonderful relationship with BFET. But then we also have an account where we're able to put those recycled funds into and build out the program for students that are BFET only consistently, and build those things like paying tuition, paying books, emergency, and the flexibility of that funding is very nice. And we are able to identify students because we code them as required in our student management system, but also in our financial aid system, so that we can easily pull up who they are. Well, easily might be a little bit of a stretch, but we can pull up who they are and what we spent on them. And then each person that is paid out of BFET or that is paid out of another state funding source that is doing BFET work is tracking that through time and effort, and that's what we use to track budget and salary. Next slide. And that is it for me.
Okay. Thank you so much, Allison, and to Andrew for sharing your how SNAP E&T is working at your college. I think it's really, really valuable, and much more valuable to hear from actual practitioners how they're utilizing SNAP E&T and the different ways that that looks depending on the community and depending on the state. And we do recognize that we offer two examples that have some significant state funding for low-income students, and we recognize that that's not always the case. And but we do know that there are ways to identify some non-federal funds, and most of the time we see that we can find some source of non-federal funds to help colleges in states where that isn't the case, to start drawing down that reimbursement and really using that model where when that reimbursement comes back, it can carve out new capacity for you to serve this community. So thank you again. So now we have lots of time to start answering the questions that have been coming in. And we will have Allison and Andrew, as well as Rachel, available, and Rick and myself to address the questions that you've been typing in. If we do not address the question during this webinar, we will work to get your questions answered after this webinar. So we will do our best to answer all questions. So I'm going to start with our list of questions, and we'll start going through, and I will direct the question where appropriate. So we had a lot of questions at the beginning about audio, and again, my sincere apologies for the technical challenges at the start of this webinar. So our first question is, my involvement with SNAP is peripheral, but I wanted to learn more about it to see whether I might learn something that might help me connect SNAP with WIOA in California. The reason is that it seems to me that the employability activities of SNAP parallel what WIOA does, which might result in waste or confusion both for clients and employers. But this maybe does not justify the cost of a long-distance call to hear your presentation. So talking about WIOA and how it can integrate, I'm going to ask Rick to address that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of alignment with the General Workforce Development System and with WIOA. As a matter of fact, some states have made that a part of their combined state plan. The reporting measures for SNAP E&T are consistent with those WIOA measures by design. So the two programs work very well together. The thing that you have to note is that's a federal funding source that comes from the Department of Labor. It can't be reimbursed, but they're funding a lot of the same providers, including college partners, that could be SNAP E&T partners. And what we've seen in many states is the workforce investment boards have a role in helping partner to find providers like colleges and community-based organizations who were getting Department of Labor funding, but also have their own funds through foundation, state, county, social enterprise, and they could actually become a partner. So those two systems work really well. As we heard from Allison, there's a partnership that works really well up in Skagit. And we've seen that in many states where the workers at the one-stop centers are trained on SNAP E&T, and they become a connection point, and it becomes part of their toolkit of how people get access to education and training.
Thanks, Rick. So the next question is, does a student need to be enrolled in SNAP E&T prior to becoming a student? And that's a really good question because it gets to the intentionality of SNAP E&T and how, you know, in order to participate in SNAP E&T, you really have to be aligned with sort of the needs that SNAP E&T is designed to meet. So the answer most simply is no. However, there is a process that needs to occur in order to assess that students align, like that their needs are aligned with what SNAP E&T can meet. So it isn't simply just a, okay, well you're a student and if you're in SNAP E&T then you'd be eligible for SNAP, so go apply for SNAP. It has to be, there has to be a documented process that shows your needs are going to be better met through SNAP E&T, which allows us to provide more intensive support services and help you develop a really targeted employment plan that we're going to help you work towards, and you're eligible for SNAP and therefore SNAP E&T. So it's a process that has to happen in the college in order to make that work correctly. The next question is for Andrew. Andrew, can you provide an overview of the staffing structure for your E&T program?
So we have at the state agency level, we have a program director and what's called, I guess another administrative person who does, the program manager does the kind of policy work and works on finalizing state plan, things like that, billing verification, things like that. The other administrative person does a lot of the eligibility checking and things like that based on our monthly eligibility lists and initial referrals. At Kirkwood, I do kind of the program or the contract management that we hold for service provision, and I oversee the subcontracts with the other community colleges. We also have another administrative person who kind of shares the eligibility responsibility and also does work with billing and things like that. At the colleges specifically, we have navigators who kind of work as a case manager of sorts and an academic advisor. And each college structure there is a little bit different. Some colleges have just specific navigators for E&T, and other colleges have navigators that are over kind of certain industry sectors. educational programming, and they serve some E&T, some non-E&T participants. I hope that answers the question on the personnel structure.
Thank you, Andrew. So this next question I'm going to direct to Rachel. If an individual is on SNAP, not a student, but is able-bodied adult without dependents, would participation in a SNAP E&T program meet the work requirement for SNAP? In other words, does SNAP E&T meet the exception and allow this individual to continue to get SNAP while they are enrolled in the E&T program?
So I'm trying to make sure I understand that question. If you're asking if SNAP E&T is a qualifying activity so that an able-bodied adult without dependents or an ABODS clocks, they're not burning through their 3 months, 3 out of 36 months of SNAP eligibility. E&T is a qualifying activity. They still have to do the 80 hours monthly average, 20 hours a week averaged monthly. So if that's the question, then E&T is a qualifying activity. But I'm not sure, Susan, are they trying to also get at the student eligibility question?
That's how I would interpret it, and I would request if your question was not answered, feel free to please type in a follow-up question. Also, I think we might be able to address this more fully offline, and we'll respond more thoroughly if your question wasn't fully answered.
Okay, hopefully that answered the question. If not, ask for clarification and we will get it to you.
Thanks, Rachel.
Sure.
The next question is for Andrew. Would you be able to share some of your policies and procedures in written form?
Sure, that's no problem. I can put together kind of a packet of things and send them off to you, Susan, if that works.
Sure.
And then if there are any specific ones, I can pick those out, or else I can kind of put together a little bit of everything that we have. So.
Great, thank you, Andrew. We'll be sure to share that out. The next question, and I think Allison, I'm gonna direct this to you. How do you identify SNAP students?
As in the system, how do we identify SNAP students?
I think I'm going to interpret this question to be like, how would you identify students that would be eligible for SNAP E&T if they're, you know, if they're not just coming through your door and saying, I'd like to be a part of BFED. So if you do any sort of internal outreach on your campus.
We do. So we go through our adult basic education classes, our English language learner classes, and speak to BFED explaining what it means to be eligible. We advertise around campus. We recently partnered with an education group through one of our local hospitals that was trying to get folks to access SNAP, to let the student body know that if you are receiving this, you could be eligible for BFED. And more importantly, if you're a student, you need to be participating in BFED, because we also have the issue where students lose their access to SNAP because they're not in the BFED program. So we are right in the center of student services on our college campus, and so we're well known as we weren't always embedded within student services, and that was an issue. That office was somewhere that was very separate from the rest of the central campus life, and now our office is embedded with student success, which is the group that actually in general is advising the students at the college itself. And so word of mouth has become institutionalized instead of just being a very boutique type program. and then we're out in our community as well. How we identify them within the student management system is based on something that our state board mandates we do, and so that they can actually pull the data on who is a BFET student at each college.
Thank you. This next question is for Andrew. Does Iowa have the ABOD waiver statewide? Are any of the students subject to the time limit?
We do have some ABOD participants in our program, and they are subject to the time limit. But we really, as a not as a mandatory state, we don't have a great number of them. So we're actually trying to reach out to increase our number in our ABOD population in our E&T program. I can't say for sure whether we are using our exemptions. That's not an area that I work on with our state agency, but I can share that answer or find that answer and share it with you also.
Great, thanks, Andrew. This next question is also for you, Andrew. How many full-time equivalent staff do you have dedicated to this project? So maybe, I know there's more than one college, I believe, so.
Sure, we have 2 at the state level and 2 at our college who are full-time staff. At the rest of our colleges, our navigators submit time studies, and on those time studies we reimburse at 50%. So I don't know that I would necessarily consider any of them full-time staff. They probably work an average of 15 to 20% per month on E&T time. So full-time staff just 4 as of now, and that's really just on the administrative side.
Great, thank you. This is a question for Allison. How does Skagit Valley fund the BFET navigator position, and are they drawing 50% reimbursement for some or all of those positions?
We fund the BFET navigator position 90% of it from state funds, and so we utilize one of our state sources called Opportunity Grant, because the students that are enrolled in Opportunity Grant tend to be co-enrolled in BFET, and so we're able to get reimbursed off of that, as well as the other portion is what the institution's base funding is actually funding for that position. And so total, we get reimbursed 45% of our one full FTE that works on BFET. And then anyone else that's working on BFET has a braided funding model with state sources, other federal sources, but we're only claiming based on the time and effort that is put in specifically on BFET. BFET has a lot of administrative pieces to it. And so we find that even when a staff member is funded out of something like Opportunity Grant, that is a program to serve other students, the amount of time spent with the BFET students that are co-enrolled in Opportunity Grant or doing the pieces for reporting that are necessary is much higher than serving students that are only on one specific grant. And so we're able to claim a pretty high rate off of that state funding source because of how intensive BFET is at our college and administratively for running those students and those programs.
Great, thank you. The next question for Andrew, what is a billing workbook?
Our billing workbook is it's a form created in Excel that collects on one sheet all of the participant expenditures that are intended to be billed by each college. The next is kind of the collection of all of the navigator time and effort billing together. So we have each college uses an Excel form to put that together, and those are all submitted to me, and then I combine those into one workbook for billing to the state. So it's really just our billing forms that we use.
Great, thank you. The next question, Allison, I believe you can answer this. What is CASAS?
CASAS is an assessment tool to measure where students are at in their reading and math areas. It's one of multiple assessment tools, but it's what we utilize for placement into basic education.
Great, thanks. This question is also for you, Allison. What are you paid for in the contract with the chamber, and are there wages involved?
Yes, so we are specifically paying a lump sum quarterly for deliverables that they then utilize those lump sums to pay the staff member that works 15 hours per week on this project, where they are connecting to employers in the local community as well as connecting with our students to get the job shadows arranged. So that's at the front end, they also were building an electronic database to have an application that would pull in and that they would utilize to match in their database to employers.
Great, thank you.
Susan?
Yes.
Susan, this is Rachel. Just for the purpose of clarity, if the question is, can you use E&T funds to pay the wages of the E&T participants who are job shadowing or in a paid internship, the answer, of course, is no. So they can pay for staff time, like with the Chamber of Commerce. But if they're asking, because they asked, the question was about wages. So if the question relates to the E&T participants who are engaging in the work activity, we cannot pay wages or stipends for them.
And that's correct, we don't do that. We're not paying wages. We do have other programs because we're partnered with our Workforce Development Council through WIOA. They do come in with their internship dollars and actually pay through that partnership when a student is eligible for, say, the out-of-school youth program, and then they may pay those individuals for their internship time by doing that, but the majority of our students are not paid, and you're correct, we cannot pay them through our grant itself.
Right. That model that you're using, though, where you're braiding funding that can be used, for one activity with our funding that can be used for others, that's great. We love that kind of model.
Great, thank you. The next question is again for Allison. Hold on. There you go. One second. How long is the average time to help a program participant become job ready? And how long are your ESL programs? And then what is the intensity number of hours per week?
So our ESL programs, I can't put a number on because when it comes to somebody learning a language, that is based on the individual learner. So they vary for each individual and their ability to commit time, and then how easily they're acclimating to learning that new language and what their home environment looks like and exposure, et cetera. So to me, that's not an answerable question with a specific number. As far as for folks to become self-sufficient and employed, what we know from data is that when a student goes into an educational component for BFET, they may take longer to become employed. But we also know when they go into an educational component and graduate that they're more likely to become self-sufficient once the employment is found a few months later. We have a variety of programs. So we have shorter training programs, say in manufacturing, that can lead to a high wage in a shorter amount of time. But then there's programs like registered nursing that's going to lead to a self-sufficient family wage that may take somebody up to 3 years. And what we look at is what the person is suited for academically and what their educational goals are. So we have folks that come in and do a 1-quarter certificate for 3 months, and then we have people that are completing the RN degree that are some of our highest wage earners that may take 3 years.
Great, thank you. We've had a few questions come in about forms and templates, and which are really great, like if there are those types of things that can be shared. And we are, through SNAP to Skills, there will be tools that will be available on the SNAP to Skills website. But also, we'll go through these questions, and if there are specific things that we can provide, we will send those out just to address. There's been a variety of questions that have come through asking about forms and templates. The next question is, are CBOs qualified to apply for SNAP E&T, or should we go through WIOA to help youth within our program? So CBOs are certainly eligible to become SNAP E&T providers. As far as serving youth specifically, youth are eligible to participate in SNAP E&T if they are receiving SNAP benefits, first and foremost. Sometimes we find that youth may not necessarily be either part of a household that is receiving SNAP, or that they are not necessarily at that moment looking for permanent employment. So sometimes there can be questions about whether the programming that's being offered to youth would sort of have the goal of permanent employment at the end. So those are all questions that you would sort of want to ask, but definitely community-based organizations can be very effective SNAP E&T providers. And in the context of colleges, they can often be great partners with colleges who, where they might be providing even more intensive wraparound support services while their participants are enrolled in a program at the college, and that tends to work really well for some SNAP participants. So we have a follow-up question about ABOD. I'm trying to understand if ABODs can be enrolled in SNAP E&T and not have to meet the other ABOD requirements, such as a 20-hour work requirement.
So E&T is actually a qualifying activity. E&T, they are still subject to that 20-hour requirement, but E&T can be the activity to meet that requirement.
Thanks, Rachel. Sure. And we can, if you have more questions, I think we could, to the person who asked this question, we can follow up afterward and make sure that your question's been answered. So we'll be happy to do that. The next question is, well, we've had several questions, just people asking if this presentation will be available. It is being recorded, and we will be putting it up on the SNAP to Skills website, so you will have access to it at a later date. The next question to Allison is about what kind of ESL students are you seeing who are eligible for SNAP, given that some individuals where English is their second language may not be eligible to receive SNAP right away?
So we're not seeing the ones that are not eligible. We do have folks that come in that are state recipients of basic food here in Washington, and we have to look at that piece and see, are you a federal recipient or are you a state recipient? We're pretty aware of the rules, and so we know when a permanent resident hasn't been here for 5 years that typically they're on state benefits and not federal, and so we're only seeing those that are permanent residents that have been here at least 5 years, and then of course our own citizens that are English language learners.
Great, thank you. We have another question about how to allocate costs to staff, and I think we will certainly address your question, but I think it'd probably be better addressed offline, just to let you know that we are seeing your questions come through. So, and again, questions, there's another question about whether a program meets the 20-hour requirement, ABOD requirement, and if their program has the equivalent number of hours of training and education activities. Andrew, are you able to speak to that, whether how your ABOD students are meeting their hours requirements?
So what we do for tracking our ABODs is our state agency requests really just class attendance records, and our colleges provide that maybe twice a month, just to make sure that they're on pace that way. Outside of that, we can look at meetings with our navigators and things like that, but mostly it's just done by attendance records with classes.
Can I add something?
Sure.
So it's not just the seat time, it could also be the homework time. So in Washington and many states, they have a 1-to-1 ratio. So 1 hour of seat time with 1 hour of homework. So the combined number of hours, scheduled hours, for 10 hours a week of the program would be 20. So that's done in multiple states, but it's whatever the standard is set by the college partner in terms of homework that goes with being in those classes.
Great, thanks, Rick. And we've had some questions about ABOD requirements, and I'm going to recommend that we will look at those questions and direct you to the right source to get your question answered, because sometimes they can be a little difficult to answer in this format, but we will try to get your question answered. I believe that was all of our questions at this point, and at this time I'd like to just ask if any of our panelists have any closing remarks that they'd like to make. Rachel or Rick? Okay.
Nothing for me.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody again for taking the time to participate in this webinar. Again, we will post this webinar on the SNAP to Skills website. We will also review the questions that have been typed in, and we'll work to either point you in the right direction to get your question answered, or we will try to answer it directly if it was not answered during this webinar. And if there's other important information that would be helpful for all to see, we will also provide that as part of the webinar that we post. So thank you again for joining, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.